Hi guys, I'm Katie Room from Periapsis Press, and today I am with the authors of Periapsis Christmas 2 for our Christmas party and discussion about the books, the stories in the book, I mean. So would you guys just, let's see, go around and just say who you are and maybe which story you wrote?
All right, I'll start.
Okay.
I'm Kaylena Radcliff. I wrote Let All Mortal Flesh Keep Silence.
I'm Isaac Anderson. I wrote White Out.
I'm William Jeffrey Rankin, and I wrote The Shelter Most High.
I'm Frederick Heimbach, and I wrote Fear Not.
And there's Jonathan. Jonathan, you want to just say who you are and what story you wrote?
I am Jonathan Shuerger, and I wrote Ember Knight.
Nice.
All right. TJ says, holy cow, there's a lot of you.
We should, if we can, we should move this to the side just so the speaker isn't so close to the microphone so we don't get feedback.
And we are missing Blake tonight. He had to skip out for personal reasons, so that's a bummer, but we've still got a full house here, so so to start off tonight, do you guys want to talk a little bit about I don't know, like your stories and maybe what inspired you to write them, what you were sort of thinking about, like Christmas stories that you were familiar with that maybe you wanted a similar vibe to, or something like that.
Why don't you choose somebody to go
Choose
first?
somebody to go first.
Yep, choose somebody.
Fred, do you want to start since your story was first?
Sure, why not? So I've been spending the last year with my reading and podcast consumption has been focused on the concept of re-enchantment. So taking seriously and really facing the idea that if you accept the supernatural, what are the implications of that? And particularly living in a culture which is very biased toward the materialistic point of view. So I thought I would have a little fun with people who basically say that they believe in the supernatural to a certain level, or they have they're sort of supernatural adjacent, but they really don't. Their day-to-day living is completely in the clockwork universe. So one of them opens the door to the supernatural on Christmas Eve, needing as you put it, a Christmas miracle, and not getting the Hallmark special interpretation of what a Christmas miracle would look like, even though that's what they kind of expect. And it is literally that people are losing control of their bladder and bowels. Some people are dying, and well, I'm giving them away, but I guess spoilers are really not the point here.
It was a very lovely left turn.
Yeah, well, thank you. So people die in the stampede for the church door, and someone in my writing group said at the end, everyone gets what they deserved. And I thought, yeah, that is what happened. When you, Katie, and when you opened up the idea of a Christmas theme anthology, I really did not think that I would have anything to say in terms of speculative fiction and Christmas. But the fact is, I am a church musician, and I have struggled for years to try to keep a church choir together. And so once I gave myself permission to go down that path, and in fact put people that I know very well in my story, people who end up dying in my story that I know very well. Once I gave myself permission, the story wrote itself, and in fact, it's 5,000 words or something. I wrote it in one sitting, and I've never done anything like that before.
Oh, fun.
So thank you for opening that door and letting the seraphim run amok. So that's the story of my story.
Nice. Should I have put the little standard disclaimer? There's
That any resemblance
right.
to real life people is coincidental.
Let's be honest. It was just revenge fantasy, basically.
I really liked your writing voice for that. I thought it was written very, very well, very tight.
Oh, well, thank you. Again, that's just me talking. So I suppose, the rule, write what you know. I really, really, really knew what I was writing in the story. So yeah, but thank you. That's kind of you to say that.
I felt like it really captured some of the feeling that I had in the past few years, sort of leaving our old church and going to a new church, of the how like productionized things sort of became with particularly with worship music. I think that is true kind of across the board, regardless of like the like level of tech that a particular church has. Is if they have like an organ or a church choir or like a full band, just how it can start to feel kind of stale and fake. And then to have that kind of shaken up was very satisfying. Let's see, Blake was next. Did anybody have any thoughts about that they wanted to share about his story at all?
About Fred's story.
Oh yeah, Fred's story. Sorry.
Oh, or were you asking about Blake's? Fred's first, and
Fred's
then
first, and then Blake's.
Yeah.
Isaac sort of shared his thoughts. So Blake's is Protector's Gift. That one is a little bit of a darker fantasy feel, but very reminiscent of his Deathbringer story, I think. Yeah, I wish he was here to talk about it, but
had a healthy dose of body horror.
Yes.
had a very fun Old West kind of gunslinger kind of feel to it.
Yeah. Without guns, it still had that. It captured that feeling.
Now, was that story set in the same world as his novel? Because Jonathan's is right, and Isaac's said that his was who said it was either Isaac or Jeffrey Rankin who said that theirs was a future story, or the character is going to be doing more.
Yeah. So yeah, the character in my story is in the novel I'm currently working on.
Okay. I think yours is next in the anthology too. Do you want to talk about it a bit?
Sure. It kind of started when it was kind of like I guess there were two parts. I had just read Arthur Macken's Hieroglyphics, which goes into his theory of like art, especially with respect to literature. So I was all full of I don't know, I guess enthusiasm about writing a very I'm going to tear down the veil between this world and the other world kind of thing. And so I started with an idea around that. And it's something I'll still probably develop at some point, but I wrote the ending first, and I started outlining the rest of the story, and I was like, this is hard to outline because it's basically a series of impressions on the part of the main character, and there's no action per se. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna let this rest for a little while, and I'm gonna think about it for a few days. And so it was probably like the next night, or maybe the night after that, or it was soon after. I woke up at like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and I just had these ideas about. I started thinking about the story. I was like, okay, I'm not going to write that story. I'm going to write a pretty different story. And when I'm not sure, when I'm uncertain what I want to write, I usually just think in terms of, well, what do I want to read right now? What would I have fun reading? So I was like, okay, what about a story about a hunting trip? And there's some kind of discovery, because I like outdoorsy things, and I'm very influenced by Algernon Blackwood and writers like that. And so I wanted something that was outside, and I want some kind of discovery that leads to difficulty on the part of the main character. So for the next hour, that when I had that, and I don't know where that inspiration came from. I just woke up, and I just had that idea in my head of a hunting trip, and that kind of led to, I can just make it the same protagonist as the book I'm working on right now. I was like, okay. And then that started leading to more ideas about this character and what would happen in the story. And so this happens from time to time. I think with everyone, where you wake up maybe in the middle of the night and you have like a great idea, or hopefully a great idea about a story. And then you're like, oh, I'll remember tomorrow morning. And then you wake up the next day and you're like, oh, what was I thinking about? I can't remember anymore. So I stayed up that night. I stayed up for the next hour, just like thinking about it. So it got committed to my long-term memory. And then,
Nice.
Finally drifted off to sleep. And then I think it was either maybe like the next day or the next opportunity I had, I outlined the whole thing. And I was like, okay, this is working, and then wrote it over the next, few weeks and stuff. So it's basically the kinds of things I like, the kind of themes and activities that I like to write about, outdoorsy things and weirdness suddenly happening, and strange discoveries and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I liked it particularly because it was kind of spooky. You have this impression that there used to be more Christmas ghost stories that were like familiar to people, and now we just have like a Christmas Carol. So I was pretty excited to have a more strange story for the mix, for
Good.
sure.
Good. Yeah, it's
When I
definitely
read
it kind of gradually morphed into a ghost story for Christmas. So I'm glad it could do that. I've been working on a few of those. So hopefully it's I'm glad I could get that together.
It gave me kind of Lovecraft vibes. Not in
good.
tone, but in kind of voice a little bit.
Sure. Yeah.
It kind of had that kind of secret darkness, like there's stuff going on you can't really sense, but it's kind of there.
Mm-hmm. He's Lovecraft's a huge influence on me. So I think in terms of the intro, I don't think I was consciously thinking of Lovecraft, but I think it just kind of turned into that, he's a big influence, and I mentioned Mackin. He's always like a huge influence on me. So I guess I kept a little bit of the original concept in terms of like some kind of like a very weird moment where the veil between worlds kind of is lifted, and the protagonist sees something that is from another time or another basically from another time or another dimension. So I kept a little bit of the original concept, and kind of came out of also like I was thinking about. There's a Robert E. Howard character, Bran McMorrin, who is a Pict, and so I was thinking about Picts and like ancient people, and Mackin wrote a great deal about those too. So yeah, so it's my usual influences: Lovecraft and Mackin and Blackwood and those kind of guys. A little bit of M.R. James maybe.
Nice. That's great.
Yeah.
Couple people rolling into the chat. Hey to Timo and Eric Wegg. And oh yeah, and TJ's been here for a little while. But hi to you too. Jonathan, do you want to talk a little bit about Ember Knight?
Sure. So my wife usually hates everything that I write, and I told her that this was going to be Gideon's good day. Gideon was going to get a good day, and then it started out okay. Huh. So, I mean, no one's gotten to see anything new from Gideon and Ashkelon for a couple of years. And so I was like, oh, this is a great opportunity to kind of reintroduce people before the second book comes out and let them kind of see how this dynamic works. So I got to really introduce all the best parts of Gideon and Ashkelon, which is them arguing, getting thrown into the absolute worst situation possible, dying 900 times, and Ashkelon throwing him right back into it. Kind of making fun of his faith at the same time. A lot of that comes from my background in the Marine Corps, where I was like the only Christian on the watch floor. And so I'd have my guys, they're in intel, so they think they're smart. And they would like poke at my faith a little bit, ask me questions, and try to see what I would come up with. And so I've translated a lot of that into Ashkelon, kind of poking at Gideon, being like, okay, so why do you think the things that you think? Are you willing to die for them? Really? Here, go die for them. Okay, you did good. Now come back, do it. Go die again. And then it became, in this story, it kind of became more like, how many times will you die? What's your breaking point? And the idea that I have behind that, of course, I approached Christmas from a whole different angle, is this, it's the season of giving. And, I was deployed over Christmas. It's like, how much will you give? Like, where is your stopping point? Where is when you say, you know what, that's kind of enough. And then when we look at the story of Christ and how much he gave for us, how much he gave up, and then how much he gave to us in turn, he didn't have that stopping point. And so I would think Gideon, who claims to be his servant, and kind of trying to be the idealized version of that servant, would also not have a stopping point unless it was defined by mortality, which Ashkelon removes, because he just wants to see, okay, how many times will you do this? And that's kind of where the idea of Ember Knight came from.
I think you captured their relationship pretty well, and particularly the things that I enjoyed about their relationship, sort of their back and forth, that contrast between like dark mage and then like this.
Right. Well, Ashkelon is essentially a destroyer. So, like, in my field of work, you have two different kinds of people who work with violence. You have destroyers and you have guardians. And the guardians are the ones who know how to use violence and translate it into something that works positively for the community as a whole. And that's where Gideon is. He doesn't lash out at people or insult them or do anything like that, because he doesn't use violence in a destructive way. Ashkelon does, natively. And it's just part of his conduct. It's part of his language. So every time he sees weakness, he didn't even hit it very hard. He just has to hit it. And so I like getting to play with the two of them on those two different dynamics of the violent man's mentality, and getting to see how it translates different.
I think your story was also the most open-handed with the like the Christmas story
Mm-hmm.
most overt. And I felt like for a lot of the same reasons that it works with your themes in your novels and your formal series with these characters, it didn't come off as, at least to me as a reader, too cheesy or trite, partly because you had Ashkelon there with his sort of cynicism that kind of just made it feel like Gideon, in contrast, was holding just this genuine faith. Like he didn't, there wasn't like an argument between them trying to reason out that faith or anything. It was just a simple explanation. Right.
Well, a lot of that came from me having to deal with my guys too, because you can't just quote verses at a Marine. It doesn't work. We live and breathe slogans. Like the propaganda is good and man, do we love it, but we also know it when we hear it. And so I had to readjust the way that I would talk to them and where I had to backtrack. So if God made the universe and God wrote his word, then his word is true. And truth will be something you can find then in the universe because he made both things. And so then if you speak truth, they will recognize truth and they will connect with it. And you can remove the implicit bias they might have against religious text. And then when they're like, yeah, I agree with you on that, I'm like, bam, here's the verse. This would have been a lot faster if I could have just done this.
I love the dynamic between the master and apprentice.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was really fun. It was fun to see them kind of bash against each other. And I also think you win the award for the highest kill count in the anthology.
That was not even in question. Like, if somebody's body count was higher, that could mean a couple things. If somebody's body count was higher than mine, I would take that as a mark of I have failed.
Kaylena, yours was next. And I thought that the two of them kind of worked well together thematically. Do you want to talk about yours a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So my story is called Let All Mortal Flesh Keep Silence. It's came from the title. The song is a hymn, a carol, an old one. It comes from the liturgy of St. James. I was looking it up, and it's very ancient. It's from the 4th century. So I had been thinking about that song because we've been practicing it. Actually, we ended up doing it for a carol sing at our church, and so I was trying to get proficient at playing it because I only just learned keyboard this year, so I had to learn how to play it. And it's in this beautiful minor key. So I've been looking at the lyrics of it a lot, and it's just this song that's really steeped in very vivid imagery of supernatural things and of the just magnificence of Christ coming to earth. And so I was thinking about that, and then I also wanted to write a follow-up, or it ended up being a prequel to the story that I wrote last year. So I wrote a story last year with a less serious song reference title called Grandpa Got Ran Over by a Reindeer. And so that story connects to this one. That one was the one set years in the future, but this was...
You know, we sang that in church last week.
Which one?
No.
The good one or the good one?
The good one or the good one? Yeah. So, yeah. So, my story is kind of, I guess, like a supernatural horror kind of story in which there's gate watchers. There's people who have these powers that they're tasked with to make sure that demons essentially can't get into the human world during the thin times, and the solstice or Christmas time is one of the thin times. So this story follows Jack Frost. Well, he goes by John because, of course, and it's his kind of a turning point in his life. So that's where the story ends up going. And so I had a lot of fun writing it. It was kind of hard putting it together. And I ended up having to sit down and kind of 2 days write the story because it just needed all that thinking ahead of it. But once it came together, it was really satisfying. So,
Hey, can I jump in with a speculative question? Because you got me thinking about something that I've been thinking about a lot. You're describing angels, which have been given a responsibility to do a job by God. And of course, we know that angels are divided very starkly into heavenly angels and fallen angels, and their natures are immutable, so they can't switch sides. They can't go back and forth, right? They're on one side of the line or the other. But so the angels cannot sin, they cannot rebel against God, but can they make mistakes? Can they?
I think, yeah, I think C.S. Lewis would say that, right? When he was writing about it, and if you ever read Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and he talks about his stars in Koryakin.
Yeah, but didn't the star do something? Yeah, that's an interesting reference, but I think I've got a story that doesn't have a good ending. It was rejected for that reason, and I think sticking some angels in there that make mistakes.
David and I actually had
permission to pursue this, and also promises from everyone present that you won't steal my idea.
Pinky swear.
David and I had a pretty long conversation about this during one of our chill streams, actually, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there was some recent activity on Twitter about the whole "can angels repent" thing, which I don't know. We're writing fiction. We're writing speculative fiction. I don't think that perfect theological accuracy is required here. I mean, we can even believe one thing and write another thing.
Yeah.
So. You got to ask yourself: are you a C.S. Lewis man or are you a Terry Pratchett man?
Oh no!
Gosh,
what a horrible choice.
An extremely easy choice, actually.
Well, it's sort of funny that there's such strong feelings about how theology and theological topics are depicted in stories when there's not any of that for like physical world, right? Like, I mean, I have to tell my daughter that unicorns don't exist. That is something that she reads a story and she comes away and she has a question about it because it's not within her normal everyday experience. And that should be ideal, I think, for theological things. If you have an angel or a demon, or say the demon repents or the angel makes a mistake, and you come away from that with a question that you then ask somebody, right, who you trust to know more about it than you, right? I think that should be an ideal situation. But people get up in arms about it.
Yeah, some people really get upset about it. The gate watchers in Kaylena's story, though, aren't angels; they're people.
Right.
Yeah.
How would you talk about them, Kaylena?
Yeah, I would say that they're originally mortals who have been bestowed with a special gift. They have like long lives because of the gift that they've been given. So they're tasked with doing this. But I use that to kind of tie in some traditional Christmas characters, or maybe some that you're not familiar with if you're not from, Pennsylvania. The one character who's been in the story twice is the Belschnickel. So if you don't know who the Belschnickel is, he's like an angry Santa, but he would be offended if you called him Santa. So he comes from like a German tradition, and he would beat you with a switch if you're bad on Christmas. but he'll give you hazelnuts if you were good. So he's kind of a fun character. And the first story has other characters in it. He has actual Santa Claus in it, but this one does not. So spoilers.
I could hear his voice as I was reading. That doesn't happen a lot, but your big bear character. I don't know, something about the cadence of his dialogue. It just I could hear him talking.
That's good, because the PA Dutch dialogue is a very specific sound, and if you've heard it once, you know what it sounds like.
It probably wasn't exactly Dutch. I heard more. It was a little more Russian, I think.
Well, yeah, the PA Dutch is really like German, so we call it PA Dutch, but it's like Deutsch, so it's
more Werner Herzog.
Yeah.
My ancestors spent time in Pennsylvania on their way to Michigan, and Heimbach is the original German name, which I adopted as a pen name, but my name is Heimbach. So that's pure Pennsylvania right there.
There it is, yeah.
I really wish they had stuck with Heimbach, because nowadays I think it's actually easier. I don't know what they thought they were doing. But any Baugh name is going to be Pennsylvania Dutch.
Oh yeah.
I took German in college. It was my minor, and one of my professors, his focus was Pennsylvania Dutch, and I basically know enough to know, like, I should just leave this to Kaylena and trust her that she has the right spelling and cadence of this, because it's not coming up like that.
So I had to ask my mother-in-law, who is much more culturally steeped in the PA Dutch tradition than I am. My family is much more culturally, Philadelphia Irish Catholic that we grew up out of. But so I'd pass it along to her, like, this sounds right, and she's like, yeah, that's good. So she was a big help.
Yeah, I enjoy him, and I really enjoyed him with John. I was kind of excited by how different his character was from Jake.
Yes,
was last year, while still being an interesting and well-developed character with sort of similar powers. So yeah. Nice.
I did want to make them purposefully different, because they had different challenges. So that wanted to come out in the story. So thank you for noticing.
All right, Isaac.
Yeah. So Wide Out. I had no idea what I was going to write or put together. I almost did something garden maze related, but I'm outlining the second garden maze, so I didn't want to double down on any decisions quite yet. So for maybe 3 weeks, I just wrote openings to things. And I finally settled on David at his window waiting for the signal. I knew that was it. So once I kind of had an idea of what David wanted and what he needed, I took a step back and I just outlined a bunch. And I wanted something that had that feeling of like kids in a neighborhood solving a problem. And I wanted it to be kind of an impossible problem, and a little bit X-Files. I want a little bit of that in there too. So as I was putting it together, I found an old short story I wrote maybe 5 years ago that had the Thomas McShane character in it. He's this guy who works with the government. They call him and kind of figures out the really weird stuff. And it had kind of the same vibe as Wide Out, where things are mysterious and things are resolved, but they're not explained. And I hope that gives it a feeling of depth and not a feeling of confusion. But it was a lot of fun to write. It really, really hurt me. There were so many things I had to cut out because it was getting too complicated, too long. But I had a lot of fun when I got to the big guy at the end. In my outline, I had just wrote they're going to meet a hag in the woods. That was in the outline. But once they actually got there, it wasn't a hag that came out of the woods. It was something a little bit different. But it was a lot. It was a lot of fun to put together. A lot of fun to write. I really got attached to those characters.
Do you want to just talk a little bit about what did come out of the woods? It has like such a vivid like imagery.
Yeah, I was trying to think of what could face them because I had a pretty early idea that it was going to be rats were going to be in there, big old rats, because I have a very vivid memory of at my grandma's house over Christmas. Like I was maybe 6, and to distract the kids as the adults did whatever they did, she put in a VHS tape of like the Nutcracker play. And it was just a recording of the stage, right? And this giant freaking puppet rat comes out and kidnaps the girl. I was like, ugh! So that was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. So I knew I needed to put rats in the story somewhere. But then once I got to the rat's boss needed to be something visceral. So, if you guys haven't read the story, this giant comes out. He's dragging a dead elephant. And that's pretty much just Hanukkah. As the Romans were attacking the temple, they were trying to defend everything. And one guy runs out with a spear and he kills an elephant. The elephant falls on him. So this guy is basically one of those Romans. He's been wandering around for eons. And I don't know, he was just he was waiting out there is the only thing I could say about it.
I would say it feels very visceral. Like you just having built up these kids, right? Walking through this storm that is building, and then kind of have the I don't want to give everything away.
Oh, you can give it away. It's fine.
Like that veil when they sort of succeed in what they're trying to do and have this giant dragging a dead elephant.
It was very, I
was like, what is this?
Only thing that can stop it is the light of the oil. And that's the only thing it's afraid of. Only thing that can scare it. So when you said something that I lost my track. I'm sorry.
Happens to me all the time.
Yeah, I was writing it. I wrote the bulk of it at the airport. I was flying to Miami, and I was a little bit motion sick. So when I got to the part where the kids were getting nauseous because of the storm, I started to get more nauseous, and I was like, "Oh, I can use this." So I tried to pour my feeling of not feeling so good into the kids, and I had to edit some things to make it not gross because I don't want you to feel gross. I want you to feel, oh, this is strange, and not stop reading because you're grossed out. So that had a couple revisions to it.
The comment about the peanut butter.
Oh yeah.
I feel like that really did like help in the keeping it light for that particular section.
If something makes me laugh when I write it, I usually keep it. I try not to be funny. My first drafts are always, I'm trying to do hitchhikers, and it never turns out hitchhikers. It always gets more serious and more somber in tone. But if anything makes me smile and anything makes me laugh out loud as I write it, it sneaks through.
I'm not allowed to do that because every time I do that, I'm like, civilians are going to read this. So then I have to have my wife read it. I'm like, is this okay? No, I didn't think so. Okay.
It's all about the verbs. Just choose tamer verbs and it'll slide.
Mm.
All right. If you guys have questions in the chat, I've missed them because Jonathan and TJ are going back and forth.
I didn't see. I've been watching. I didn't really see
thanks, babe.
any questions.
All right. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about, and I'm not sure how different necessarily this will take the conversation, but how you feel that your story in this anthology compares with your novels, your more formal work, and maybe a little bit about like if you think that it reflects your voice in the same way, so that if a reader likes your story, what can they look forward to if they pick up your stuff?
If you like plucky kids taking on a monster, yeah, you'll like my other stuff.
And Garden Maze is one of the ones
Garden
that you've
Maze
done.
Is great. Garden Maze
Do you
is
have
fantastic.
any? Do you have any others, or is that the only one right now?
Right now, yeah. So I wrote
Okay.
Garden Maze as a break from writing my larger project that is almost done. It's almost freaking done. So hopefully I'll be sending out copies for people to read and give their feedback on, hopefully January, around that time. I'm deep in editing right now, and I'm very angry and very happy at the same time.
Nice.
What about? I'm curious to hear about how Fred would answer this question, because it sounds like his story in the anthology is a write what you know kind of thing, but his other books are very fantastical and very very Baroque.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how he would answer this question.
I like that word Baroque. I'm going to take that as a compliment. Yeah, it's if you like the satire, obviously that shows up in most of my, not quite all, but most of my writing. But I am getting more fantastical and more theological as I get older. Started out more sci-fi and sci-fi adjacent, but also there are just more markets. If you don't know about Mysterion and what they're doing, you should definitely check them out. They've published me and Silence and Star Song. Now I feel like, and as I've gotten older, I realize that I need to stop writing generic stories, which then I can send out to 20 different places, because I usually end up getting 20 rejections, and I have better success writing for one or two markets. And that has been a revolution in my success as someone, in terms of getting published. So I really appreciate, and if any of you want to start a magazine with more angels and fewer robots or time machines, or angels with robots time machine, and that I could do too, but I think there's got to be angels. Yeah, and there are going to be a lot of angels in my future.
Yeah, I was gonna say the satire for sure. I really liked The Devil's Dictum, and Reagan, was it Reagan?
Ronald Reagan's Brilliant.
Yeah, that one. Yep, that one.
Yeah, those are the two kind of gonzo alternate history.
Yes, yeah.
You wrote a gonzo Ronald Reagan alternate history?
Ronald Reagan in a jetpack.
Oh, man. That may not be alternate history. That might be actual history.
Yeah. And so my
go.
problem with writing that is, a lot of people who approach alternate history, they're looking for something very rigorous, and you just change one little fact and then watch the changes propagate. And then I have Ronald Reagan's in The Devil's Dictum, the United States is founded by Satan worshiping pirates. And so the pilgrims get chased down to Haiti, and so sort of the United States is the Satanic Republic, and Haiti is what we think of as the United States. And yet everybody that we know of in our timeline ends up getting born anyway. So you Calvin Coolidge, Richard Nixon, the list goes on, and J. Edgar Hoover is the high priest of the Church of Satan. And, people say, well, that couldn't happen. And it's like,
Don't care.
buddy, we're just having fun here. So I do struggle with how to slot those into the right genre, because a lot of people come with very, very wrong expectations when I tell them that those are alternate histories.
Yeah, it's what was that one? There's a pretty common one that a lot of people know. So I think it's got a date for a title, which is why I can't remember.
The Eric Flint one.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's an example of the more rigorous.
Right. Like I started reading that, and it's got like that fantastical start that transports a town from the modern age to 16 something, I think it is.
And it probably just gets more.
But what?
1642.
Yeah.
But it just gets more and more mundane.
It's basically isekai, where it's like, okay, here's somebody from the modern world inserted here, and now they're going to do all of the things and make all of the structures, indoor plumbing and stuff for people, and it's like, okay,
that sounds like Moby Dick, but not as competent.
It probably is a lot of fun for people who are like fans of history.
Oh, I bet some people love that.
But for me, it was like, who was like interested in moving a town, right?
Yeah.
It was like we got farther and farther away from that spark, and it was so I quit.
Definitely a genre challenge to describe. The different kinds of stories that you could tell with those premises.
I was actually talking about this a little bit yesterday. I think I tweeted about it. Somebody was talking about high and low fantasy.
Oh, geez, there's a can of worms.
I know.
I'm pretty sure there's even just like 2 or 3 different definitions of low fantasy, because I don't think, and I think that's why there's a lot of a fight about it, is there isn't a agreed upon definition of what low fantasy is.
There's like a clear idea of what high fantasy is, and then there's like a sort of idea of low fantasy.
Yeah,
that's like sometimes in reference to high fantasy, and sometimes kind of in reference to like lowbrow, or
just sometimes it's used like urban fantasy
or urban. Yep,
where it's like
takes place in the real world.
It takes place in our world, versus something like, I've heard Game of Thrones described as low fantasy, even though it's not our world. It's less fantastical and more it's like subversive of the high fantasy. So it's like, who even knows?
Yeah,
but
I can see that.
That's a conversation for another day, I guess.
But what I was saying was, if you take the meaning of high fantasy and low fantasy to be more fantastical and less fantastical, then 1642 would be a low,
very, very
low fantasy alternate history feel, and then Fred's would be a high fantasy alternate history.
in level of
Like
fantastical
the fantastical elements.
That's 1632, by the way. Just for the
32.
record, I looked it up. So if someone wants to Google it, that's what it is.
Yeah, by Eric Flint, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
What about William Jeffrey Rankin's stuff? How does his other published works compare?
David's
to
getting
his
us back on
stories?
track here.
Yeah, what was the question again?
What would people like if people found elements to like in your story in this anthology? What kinds of those things might they see in your other published works, or what would you recommend, or even how is your other published work different than what's here?
Use this as a springboard to shill
promote
your stuff.
Oh no, I think the stuff I'm working on right now is basically it's somewhat similar to my Carnegie and Sherlock Holmes stories, only it's presented in a modern voice, or a relatively modern voice. The current book is set in 1982, and the reason why I chose that is because of the computer technology that was available at the time, and I wanted to. I have nostalgia reasons for picking that, but it also ties into the story significantly. So it's more of a modern voice, but it has the same features as my other stories in terms of it's a combination of mystery and adventure and gradual discovery of whatever is at play in the story. So I think there's also elements of like a team of people working together. So that, like in the current novel, and it's actually the same characters in the story in Periapsis Christmas. The characters are ex-British. Well, at the time in 1972, when the story happens, they're still in the British Army. And then in the novel that I'm writing, they're but by that time they're in their 50s. They've left the army. So there's elements of a team working together, and the novel I'm currently working on involves those two. So Richard and Jonathan Quint, and the team that they work together with to solve the problem that they're working on. Without I don't want to say too many details, but. Yeah, so it's basically what I like to write: mystery and adventure, elements of supernatural fiction and weird fiction. So if you like that, this is a more modern take on that. And I guess I can say that at the beginning of the current book, anyway, it has the appearance of kind of a traditional ghost story, but then it turns into something else. I don't want to say any more than that, though.
Nice.
I would agree. I think last year, Fairy Tree was your story, and I thought it reminded me a lot of Invocations of the Submortal. But I think this year's story did remind me more of The Black Beast of Ipswich, which I read.
Yep.
So yeah, and of course there's your voice in both of those, but I would agree that would be the story that I would first direct people to.
Yep. Yeah, it's been a challenge, or not a challenge, but it's something I've had to keep an eye on. Like, what kind of voice am I using? Am I using my Victorian Edwardian era voice, or am I using my 1982 voice? So as I'm going through now, because I'm doing some like basic editing of my own work, and it's like, ooh, this sounds like something that Sherlock Holmes would say, or something like that. So I've got to that needs to be put more in Jonathan Quint's voice, or Richard Harvey's voice, or whoever's voice it is, to make it sound a little bit more modern and not quite so formal. as you'd hear in like Edwardian or Victorian times.
Who are your influences for the 80s style?
I think my influences are the same. It's just updated. Most of my guys are like, aside from some indie authors that I take influence from in terms of like pacing and action scenes and that kind of thing. Most of my guys are like the guys that I mentioned before. So Lovecraft, Mack, and Blackwood. And I just basically, William Hope Hodgson, and I just give it a more modern voice. Yeah, so I don't read any really like modern trad pub guys. It's all the people I read are indie guys like Donald Eichlucht and I just finished reading Carl Gasso's book and then Neo-Victorians books as well are fantastic, and I take a lot of influence from guys like that in terms of mostly I think pacing and yeah, like I said before, like pacing and action scenes. How to properly go into those without providing too much detail and making them too long and that kind of thing. So mechanically, I like to pick up things from those guys.
Nice. Jonathan, would you like to talk about how your work might, how your story might point to towards your larger body of work, as far as?
Yeah, I tried to include as many elements of the larger body as I could in this short little vignette. You have Gideon and Ashkelon arguing or talking. I guess it's just talking for them. And then you have some kind of combat where I try to take fantastical elements and actually get to some tactical sense coming from the side of the bad guys. I'm sick to death of stormtroopers who don't take cover. It's bad enough you're wearing white armor that doesn't work, apparently, but get behind something. That bothers me. It's like, I don't know what about being a stormtrooper turns off your survival instinct, but it happens. So, with the locusts, I was like, if I was a demon and I had the ability to just summon portals to hell from anywhere, I would just throw, entirely dispensable little critters out and just have them do like Sherman's March to the Sea on a really small scale. Just burn down some farms, crops, keep people inside, make them afraid to move around. You got denial of assets, denial of territory. Afraid to move around. You got the psychological hit. I was like, all that stuff is kind of cool. How would you stop it if you were just one guy? Well, you'd have to be interesting enough for this thing to just stick around. And so that that was part of what drove the story for me, was trying to figure out that problem of how is Gideon going to kill about 5,000 4-foot tall demons? Well, he's not going to. What he's going to do is keep their attention for long enough that they're all going to starve, because he won't quit. And I was thinking of Shema from Chronicles, who stood in the field of lentils and refused to leave it. And the bad guys wound up leaving first. The story itself gives several personality aspects of both Gideon and Ashkelon. Gideon won't quit if it's the right thing to do. And I don't know if anyone notices in the story, he actually doesn't even consider quitting. And Ashkelon lets him and just observes, watches, and learns. He's willing to watch and learn. He's willing to be impressed. He hasn't been much. Heroes usually fail to live up to his standards, which is why he's so interested in Gideon. So that was in this story. That was probably what the larger body of Shades of Black is about. Is Ashkelon He's bitter. He's cynical. He's already genocided one world. Light failed to stop him. The heroes weren't heroic enough. They were all compromised in some way. So now he's giving the universe one last chance. And he's going to train his own to his own standards. And if this one fails, well then, he's just going to take everything out. I call it, it's actually in the next book, so you get a sneak peek, whipping the horse that is dragging us all toward oblivion. The progression of their relationship. This part was fun because it gets to be in between the two books, and it wouldn't fit in either one if I tried to do it. So it was fun to be able to do this. So I appreciate the opportunity. But their dynamic is shifting as we go through the books, and getting to see how it's changing. Of course, Gideon's at a higher level after the first book, and then we get into the second book, and some stuff happens that doesn't really degrade him, but it alters him. And so this story is probably a really good introduction into the Shades of Black stuff. Not at all into Exorcism of Frosty. That just isn't gonna work. Like I was on deployment and my guys were depressed because it was Christmas time, so I wrote them a story about, you know what, it's not okay that a snowman came to life when children sang a song they had never learned in the woods. And that's not okay. We don't call that heartwarming in my PTA meeting. That one is just some fun inquisitor type guy who has to hunt down and destroy the possessed snowman that is now kidnapping children and taking them to the north. Why is this a cartoon?
Oh man.
This is not a good introduction to that. I also considered doing a story from that, but I didn't get anything together fast enough.
Kaylena.
Hi. Yeah. So yeah, I would say I think the style of my stories, of this story, you wouldn't be surprised if you read any of my other work. So the series that I'm currently in the middle of is a young adult dystopian fantasy kind of sci-fi elements with that one. And I think tonally is a lot the same. It's character driven, lots of action plot points, and also, you know, there's some elements of, you know, horror, like there's dark things in them, but one thing that's, you know, I think I keep throughout a lot of my stories is sort of, you know, the resurrection theme. There's always light, even in the darkness, and that's something I think that kind of just carries through all of my stories because I'm a Christian and that just happens. Yeah, and I think part of that was influence from some of the authors that I've read growing up. I think I'd mentioned this before. Flannery O'Connor was a big influence on me formatively as a writer during my college years, and she's a Southern Gothic writer, and big point of all of her stories is this point of catharsis, is where the climactic action happens. And so I think that's influenced the way that I've written, and grew up reading C.S. Lewis, so that influenced the way that I think about fantasy as well. So yeah, I think that comes out in my stories, and I think you read that in a lot of the stuff I'm working on. So
Nice.
What flavor of dystopia is your series?
I think Katie would think it's so I think she put it really well. It's dystopian, but it's not like dystopian that you would expect, because it's not like
It's really very much fantasy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a dystopian fantasy, and with the emphasis on the fantasy rather than the dystopia.
So the world is broken, right? But there's more fantastical elements in it. And also I think there's some of the tropey stuff of a lot of dystopia that's not in there. Like the main character is a female teenager, but she's not good at everything. And she's not she's a flawed character with a lot of actual baggage that she has to deal with, and she needs help from other characters. And I make a point of that because, like, I was a teenage girl once. We're not able to do literally everything. And I think it's important to make that clear.
We're not all like painfully plain, but unavoidably and irresistibly attractive.
Yeah. So that I think comes through.
Plain. Wow. Beautiful.
Not beautiful in the classic sense, but also not unattractive.
Right.
What does that mean?
With me. Yeah, it's not that
She looked like a wall.
All right.
I think, especially thematically, it's much more fantasy with, like she said, like resurrection, redemption elements, as opposed to dystopian, which tends to be a little more
bleak,
nihilistic,
dark,
anti-hero, that kind of. So it is, again, one of those hard to box genre-wise, because if you say dystopian fantasy, it doesn't necessarily draw up the correct image. Yeah. But when you're talking about it, it's like, well, that's the right word for it still. Right. So yeah,
dystopian fantasy, but the girl is just straight up cute.
For my project, I was running into a problem with a perfect female character. She may not be in book 1 anymore. She might just be in book 2 now. It got too big. I had to chop it in half. But the way I sort of handled her is she is perfect. She's right about everything. And then everything falls apart as the story progresses for her. And it's kind of like her... It's like all the other characters, they're working towards something that they need, that they want. They have these goals. She already has her goal set at the beginning of the book. She has what she wants. She has what she needs, and everything is taken away as the story progresses. So it's kind of like they're moving in opposite directions with each other, which I thought was really interesting. And speaking of arguing with, like, in Jonathan's story, I found that my favorite scenes is when they argue. Whenever I was having trouble with who this character is and what this character thinks, I would just put them in a little scene and have them fight. And very quickly, they told me exactly what they thought and what they needed. And those are some of my favorite scenes that I snipped into the book, found a spot, replaced this with that. And... So perfect characters have some purpose in some areas, as long as you break them.
Yeah, so I was saying, especially if you make sure that it doesn't stay for them.
I have this really uncomfortable visual of authors being people who like take bugs, put them in bottles, just shake it up and watch them go.
Especially when I did, yeah. It's really sad because she's one of my favorite characters. I really, really like writing her. She's a really cool, she has a cool personality. She's really mean, but really fun to write.
Mean is fun to write. It usually means you get to say the things you actually wanted to say in the first place, but
yeah, especially when she's wrong. When she's really mean, she's also wrong, and like the story understands that, but the rest of the world's going with her in certain aspects. That's a fun playground to jump in.
Yeah, well, most people can relate to that. If you have a manager, he's mostly wrong. Most people can relate to that. You're saying something stupid, bro, but we're all going along with it. Why is this happening?
Should we wrap this up?
I think so. Yeah.
I wanted to say hi to Anne real quick. She says, "Hey y'all, I bought the Christmas book yesterday, so it's great to hear from the authors before it comes. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy it." I think you will.
Leave a review.
Yes.
Please.
I think there's a couple reviews up already on Amazon.
Yeah.
I think so.
Definitely not from any of the authors in the
No,
collection.
no.
Definitely not. Wouldn't think of it.
Let's see. I can just even look at them right now.
No, I learned from Twitter you're supposed to make 10 other accounts and then review it.
Oh.
Ooh. When I first put out Garden Maze, I didn't know how publishing worked, or self-publishing, whatever. I got Goodreads figured out because I guess that's what you're supposed to do. I was like, oh, I'll just put some stars on it, get it started, and I had my face really big, 5 stars. The first review, I'm like, oh, so I didn't know how to remove it.
Now
like,
you've done it.
Oh well, it's what it is.
I have a image saved, like a meme, but I think it's like the chat image with like the bubble, and it's a 5-star review. I'm the author. I think it's great.
Yeah.
Ours, we have action-packed and full of great writing and great stories. I won't read them completely here, you guys. If you're interested, you can check it out yourselves. But yes, I'm always a proponent of reviews, and obviously particularly in this case, I have a vested interest. And I think, and they do help the authors, but I come from a reader's perspective, and I particularly encourage people to leave reviews to help other readers find the stuff that they would like, because it helps authors, because the algorithm knows that it helps readers.
Yes.
So
And especially while it's sort of a new release, and people might be wanting to find a book before Christmas,
right,
there's a little bit more of a time sensitivity to leaving a review if you've read and liked it, because that'll help other people find it and read it before Christmas. There's still a lot of time. I think we're actually we published this, it didn't feel like it, but we published this one about a week earlier in the year than we published the last one.
Right, yeah.
So there's still time for people to get it and even get the print version before Christmas. So those reviews will definitely help other readers find it, keep it kind of fresh in the algorithm as it's a new release.
Yeah. And Anne also says, like, comment, and subscribe.
Do all those things. Press all the buttons. Hit the bell. Surfshark is our sponsor.
Ring that bell. Wait, where is it?
All right. Thank you guys so much for coming and for sharing your thoughts and your stories with me. And
real quick, I want to thank y'all for inviting me onto this. It was such a joy to write this story. It's so great to be included in this. It was really fun to read everyone's story in the anthology. It's just really, really fun.
Yeah, we were happy to have you. All right.
I don't hear that much.
All right. And of course, I encourage everybody to check out the other things that these authors have written. I have reviewed at least one of their independently published works, and you can find that on my website, periapsispress.com. All right. I'm going to call it. Thank you guys so much again, and Merry Christmas.
Thanks, guys.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.